The federal government has just rolled out its fiscal roadmap for 2019, 7 months out from the expected federal election. And they're betting voters will ignore billions of dollars in red ink in the face of billions of dollars in perks. Among those perks, and we've mentioned them, lower interest rates on student loans, a program that aims to help millennials purchase their first home, and expanded benefits for seniors. Last week, the NDP released its own budget wish list. So does this one meet the mark or miss it? NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh joins me now to discuss just that. Hi, Mr. Singh. Great to see you again.
Great to see you.
I appreciate it. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the budget, let me ask you about what we just heard happen in the House. We were listening to Minister Morneau kind of be drowned out. We know there were a lot of efforts from the on the part of the Conservatives to delay the tabling of that budget. What's your sense? Do you agree with that tactic? Were you participating in trying to drown out Mr. Morneau?
Not at all. We weren't participating. I don't think that's the appropriate tactic. Canadians are frustrated with this Liberal government that thinks that they can shut down the Justice Committee and not allow more members and more people to come forward to provide their testimony and to bring in a former Liberal minister to try to deal with, in an independent way, this scandal is not something that Canadians feel confidence in. So I don't approve of what the government's doing. The Liberal government's not reassuring Canadians that they're working on their side, but I don't support the Conservatives' way of...
Why didn't you support that? We were speaking with them earlier and they said, look, we're just using what we can to make a point because they voiced the same concern with you about the committees deciding not to, or the Liberal members of the committee deciding not to go ahead with that study.
Well, on this particular issue, we didn't join at all in the way that the Conservatives raised a concern. We believe that Canadians ought to know the truth. We've been pushing for a public inquiry. That's the only way now to move forward in a way that would be independent, allow a judge to have a broad mandate to hear from all the witnesses so that we can make sure Canadians know what the truth is. Right now, Canadians are very concerned that this government, the Liberal government, is working on the side of the wealthy and powerful instead of working on the side of everyday Canadians.
Okay, let me ask you about that because this budget seems to try and counter that message. There is stuff in here for millennials, students, people wanting to enter the housing market, people who don't have drug coverage, seniors, Indigenous people in this country. A lot of that meets what you laid out and we spoke about last week in your budget wish list. Are they, so to speak, eating your lunch?
Not at all. I wish they were. I would be more encouraged, but let's look at what they're offering. When Canadians are struggling with $25,000 a year for daycare, for childcare, this government's providing a small amount that's not going to actually deal with anything. Millennials who can't even imagine buying a home are struggling to find a place to call home, can't even find a place to rent. They're providing all these measures that do nothing to address the real housing crisis.
Why do you think they do nothing?
Well, look at what people are struggling with right now. Many Canadians, one of the measures they offered is to allow first-time homebuyers to use their RRSPs to buy a home. How many millennials have enough saved up in their RRSP to buy a home? This shows you how out of touch. Let me just finish. This shows you how out of touch this government is with what people are going through. What we need is cooperative housing. What we need is building new affordable housing. What we need is non-market housing. We need the government to build those houses once again, to build those homes once again.
They promised to with their affordable housing plan.
Again, what their plan is to say, listen, vote for us, and after the next election, maybe we'll deliver. They haven't put it into legislation. They haven't put it into this budget. Much like their commitment, they made a commitment to close CEO stock option loopholes in 2015. They promised to do it. In this budget, they've said it again. They said, we promised to do it, but in the far distant future.
They've promised a full tax review, which they haven't delivered on.
Well, they haven't delivered on that, but they also specifically said we're going to crack down on the CEO stock option loopholes. And they said, again, wait another year, no, wait another couple of years before we do it. This government, really what they do is they say a lot of nice things, but when you scratch the surface of it, is it really helping Canadians out? For seniors, one of the things seniors tell me they're worried about is when a company goes bankrupt, they're worried that their pensions will be stolen. This government has done nothing to actually stop that from happening. What happened to Sears workers, where we saw $700 million stolen from Sears workers, that's not been addressed in this budget.
But the kinds of things you're talking about don't come without a price tag, right? And we've seen an increase in federal revenue. Most of that has gone towards program spending. I mean, they're still running a deficit, even though they have, I think, $22 billion extra dollars in revenue. They're still running a $14 billion deficit. So, I mean, like, is there the fiscal space to do everything that you're asking of?
Absolutely. Let's look at their priorities. What they did is they gave $14 billion away to the wealthiest corporations in the last fall economic statement. That is not something we believe in doing.
But that's to address an issue that we've heard from not just corporate Canada, about competitiveness.
That shows a different priority. We know very clearly, with all the evidence we have, that when you give blank checks to corporations, it does not create jobs. It does not ensure that there's any support for workers. But are you concerned, for example, about the slide in business investment? I mean, there's two consecutive quarters of 10% decrease in business investment. How would you address that? We know very clearly that this particular measure does not actually create jobs. We've seen Harper's government do the same thing, where they gave tax-free money or no strings attached money to corporations.
The only way they get the tax break is if they reinvest it in.
It doesn't actually. If you look at what happens, we've seen GM do the same thing. They take taxpayer dollars with no strings attached and they walk away. They shut down their factories. Harper's government did the same thing. Now Trudeau's government's doing the same thing, where they give money away to corporations, hoping that they'll stay without any guarantees in place. That's not my priority. My priority would be, instead of spending the $14 billion there, I would actually invest in what we need to do right now for Canadians. Instead of saying caving into the pharmaceutical industry, which is not spending any dollars at all, we could have just changed the way we set prices for medication, which would have dropped the cost of medication by up to 20%, would not have cost us $1.
They could still do that, though.
They haven't done it.
They're waiting for the report,
well,
right?
What they're doing
it's
is,
not in the budget.
what they're doing is they're just kind of leading Canadians along. They're saying, okay, wait and see, wait and see. Well, Canadians can't wait and see anymore. They can't have a government continue to fall to the pressure of lobbyists that are for the most powerful, like the pharmaceutical industry. They caved on doing something as basic as updating a list that would have reduced the cost that we pay as Canadians, but they didn't do it because they caved to the pharmaceutical industry. Each time we see this government come up with a choice between people and the most powerful, they choose the most powerful.
But you're painting a picture of them making the choice like it's a binary choice, one over the other. The business climate, the idea that competitiveness in this country is suffering is one that affects a lot of people who are employed by those industries. Well, how would you address, for example, the uncertainty created by NAFTA, by the impasse in trade between the U.S. and China? What would you do? What would you tell all those companies that do employ a lot of Canadians?
I'd say if there's some strings attached, if there's some guarantees for jobs, if there's guarantees to keep those jobs here in Canada, we can support folks. But if there's no strings attached, there's no guarantees connected to jobs, there's no guarantees connected to keeping a business in Canada, then no, we're not going to give blank checks to
there'd be no
companies.
tax break if it's tied directly to business investment. If you're a business and you invest, you get a tax break if you invest in capital. That you're not in favor of that.
Let's look at what's happened already. We know that the current blank check approach that the Liberals have done and the Conservatives have done have demonstrably shown with evidence that does not create any jobs. What I would do
The economy has grown.
They do not create jobs. When
thousands of jobs were added.
We have the evidence, Vashi. You know, when Harper gave blank checks away to corporations, it did not guarantee job growth. It did not create any clear incentives to create jobs in Canada. What companies do is they bank that money on the side and they don't reinvest it. Same thing with what the Liberals have proposed now. They've again given blank checks away to corporations without any guarantees that there'll be jobs here in Canada. I don't believe in that. I believe in making sure there's guarantees for people to make sure Canadians get ahead. With NAFTA, what I would have done differently is make sure we get rid of an illegal tariff that threatens hundreds and thousands of jobs. The steel and aluminum tariffs are still being imposed on Canadians. We're still suffering because of that.
Would you have done that at the expense of signing NAFTA?
I would have never signed an agreement until those tariffs were removed. I would have said, listen,
you realize the kind of uncertainty that would leave the rest of the economy with?
Listen,
I know what you're saying, but
we know that the United States needs us to sign this. They need us in this deal. They benefit from trading with us, and we have a leverage point. We could say, listen, you've got illegal tariffs against us. We're going to agree to signing an agreement, but let's get those tariffs away first. That seems like a basic step that this government wasn't willing to do. Again and again, we see that this government is not committed to people. They're not committed to actually standing up for what people need, for the housing concerns, for the environment. Right now, we've got the biggest polluters that are exempt from the carbon tax. How does that make any sense?
But there is a carbon tax.
But what sense is a carbon tax if they're not actually imposing it on those who pollute the most? The biggest polluters actually are exempt up to 90%, where everyday Canadians have to pay the price. That does not make sense. I mean, Canadians are saying, listen, what is going on here? Why do we have a government that talks a good talk on one hand, but every action they take shows that they're prioritizing the wealthy and powerful over everyday Canadians?
All right, I have to leave it there. I'm out of time. But thank you, Mr. Singh. Appreciate you coming by.
Thanks so much.